and the cities around us change, whether they're hopefully becoming more walkable and accessible, or sometimes we're seeing them go in the opposite direction. I encourage you to meet your neighbors. Whenever I talk about community organizing and grassroots advocacy, it can be such a gargantuan task when you think about activists and grassroots organizing and changing the world from the bottom up. But when you get to the foundation of community engagement, the best way to start is can you name three of your neighbors? If you don't know three of your neighbors, that's where you can start. That's how you can start engaging with your community.
Welcome to the Smart Cities Council podcast and its special series with our global thought leaders. Smart Cities Council's Global Thought Leadership Team is an exclusive group of subject matter experts driving policy and standards, setting industry trends, conducting research, and building and sharing knowledge to advance our mission. My name is Fanni Melles. I am the Global Thought Leader for Youth Engagement at the Smart Cities Council, and today I welcome Jennifer Borrero to the podcast, who is the Global Thought Leader for Youth Housing. Jennifer Borrero is an award-winning first-generation Latina entrepreneur. Her work as a United Nations ambassador has allowed her to lead projects around the world, from opening a public health clinic in Nicaragua to developing affordable housing communities in the US. She has run programs in the private and public sectors that focus on creating social change. Jennifer has been recognized as an emerging Hispanic executive, receiving the 30 Under 30 award for her work as the founder of Youth Housing Coalition, an organization that aims to empower young people to solve some of the country's most pressing problems. Her work has been featured on multiple TEDx stages. She is currently a Global Goals Ambassador for the United Nations Association. Her work sits at the intersection of sustainability and social justice. Jennifer's ultimate goal is to highlight innovative solutions to global problems by building community across cultures. Jen, welcome to the podcast. And let's start with an easy question. What does youth housing mean?
To me, youth housing in the terms of organization is putting young people at the forefront of the housing industry, not just physically housing young people, but making the next generation of community members are being involved in those decision making.
Okay, let's break this down a bit. Who are these young people? What age range? What location? What culture are we talking about?
When we're talking about youth, in terms of youth housing, there's defined age, but we, as the next generation of housing leaders, of inhabitants, of residents, it's really people around the world that normally aren't in to mold their environment and cities and aren't consulted for these specific roles. So there's no specific age range, but we do define it as basically the
Interesting you say that they are not involved in influencing their environment. Why do you say that?
say that because they, as individuals, of course, have influence. Talking about senior corporate positions or elected politicians, roles that are seen as powerful with a lot of either political, corporate, monetary influence that are able to sway what is developed, how urban planning is progressing. Young people are usually not in those positions. So that's what I mean by that. Not that they don't have influence as an individual, but maybe career-wise, politically, with generational wealth, they lack that ability to really have a platform and say what they're looking for.
Thanks for the clarification, because it's also very important to establish that they have the role, they have the power, maybe just not in the very big scale. Now, is this still the case? So in the last few years, we have seen how youth demonstrations happened and how that at least informed the policymakers and the decision makers about what they want to do instead of just receiving the decisions. Is this still the case that they are not involved and they, as a big whole, influence the decisions?
That's definitely changing. They can be involved and they do have more influence now. What we're seeing, example, in the US is we even have Gen Z Congress members. So when you're looking at traditional structures and roles of people that are in power, that are representing large populations of people at a federal level, we do have now genders that are in those roles. We see a lot of organizations that are being more intentional about tapping into Gen Z and the next generation because they see that very valuable insights, and they are the ones that are going to be populating and living in these environments. We are recognizing the value of tapping into the knowledge of people, but I still think that young people are able to encourage their community involvement, community engagement, social media footprint, but need more of a platform as far as that same level of influential power when it comes to financially being able to sway a decision in a certain manner. When at the end of the day, when a decision has to be made, even if we see a majority of the population or of young people advocating for a specific thing, if they don't have that decision making power or monetary influence that is supporting them, it might not go in their favor. So that's where I think there's still work to be done, is making sure that they have the resources and the platform to really push their strategy.
It's reassuring that it's changing, and I understand that there is a long way to go to involve them more in the decision-making processes. Now, the other part of youth housing is housing itself. And I would love to understand what you mean by housing, because, for example, it's debatable whether I can be accounted as youth. Let's leave that aside for now. But for example, I am not necessarily in the process of buying my own home. I have been renting for a long time, and I am not seeing an opportunity or my willingness to, for example, pay so much for a house, which is just bonkers how expensive the houses are now. And obviously, we can talk about affordability, but at the same time, I also think that this kind of situation allows me bigger freedom, which I appreciate as a young people, because then I can choose where I live without being shackled down by the property itself. So, when you talk about housing, what is involved in your thinking?
That's a great point. And Fanny, you are not alone. A lot of young people feel that burden of if they do want to purchase a home, or if they want the flexibility of not purchasing a home, they're in that position of seeing that either way it is very expensive and it seems more and more unattainable. When we talk about housing, it doesn't have to do with home versus renting and which mode or which one you fall under. It all formed um, within a built structure, whether that's a house, whether that's an apartment, whether the home, whether that's some other sort of structure. Even a short-term emergency sheltering is the umbrella of housing. So as modalities fall under housing, whether you rent, whether you own.
Thank you so much for the clarification. It makes it so much easier to go into the conversation. Why is youth housing important for smart cities? And you could also start with, what does smart city mean to you?
Smart cities mean to me a city that is intentional about promoting economic, environmental, and social sustainability, a city that is leveraging technology to reach equitability in multiple facets. That is what a smart city means to me. When we talk about youth housing, it's including young people in that process and in the implementation of these solutions. So, not just the fact that young people are residents of a house or an apartment and they live in a structure, but making sure that they are part of the decision making process and the implementation of these solutions to reach what we view.
Is youth housing the end goal or a tool?
I would say using is a tool, and the different tools in our toolbox includes being as inclusive and representative as our society is. So making sure that all residents and inhabitants have a say and are being included in all of these processes that we're mentioning. So it's not that it's the end goal, it's that it's one specific asset that's focused on a segment of the population that needs to be more included. So I would say it's a tool.
Cool. Now, you seem very passionate about it, and your bio is just amazing. So, what has been your journey towards this specific tool?
Yes. So I started working in housing advocacy in Los Angeles. I was volunteering on Skid Row. For those that are US based, Skid Row is a very well known area within downtown Los Angeles. It's multiple square blocks where people are unhoused and living in the streets. I was volunteering with homelessness services providers and started to see. Through those efforts, I ended up getting an opportunity to work as a project director for the Veterans Administration. The VA has a huge plot of land in West LA where they are developing housing for unhoused veterans. I got to be part of that development and see how that progressed. I moved back to Atlanta, Georgia. I also started my nonprofit Youth Housing Coalition because I saw myself getting these opportunities to be a part of housing policy, housing advocacy, but also housing development, which is the real implementation and actual construction of these buildings that we talk about. And that's an area that can be very difficult to get into if you aren't super wealthy. So starting youth housing to gather a group of young people that are really passionate about urbanism, smart cities, housing, walkable cities, the built environment, and they want to be part of the solution. They want to be legislators, they want to advocate for changes in policy in their communities, but they also want to be developers and they want to revitalize maybe build that are in their neighborhoods. So that has been my journey with Youth Housing Coalition. And now as the executive director of that nonprofit, we work with young people to make sure that they get the baseline education on the housing industry as a whole in the US, from development, zoning, advocacy. And then we have to lead an annual fellowship with young people to make sure that they are getting actual hands-on training, getting the opportunity to excel in these areas. And lastly, Youth Housing Coalition, we are a developer ourselves. So we focus mixed use development in the Georgia area and developments that are with and really.
Could you please explain one of these projects for us to understand what amazing stuff are you doing? Because I know that you are doing amazing stuff.
Sure. So one of the projects right now is in rural Southern California. This is a 27 unit home community where the land has been zoned for farm worker housing and the land is owned by a community land trust. So in this project, we are developing 27 tiny homes that are going to be specifically for farm workers. The land is owned by a community land trust. So we are uh, using some of the tools to prevent rapid or exponential increases in the price of these tiny homes to keep it affordable for local residents. And we are co-developing that and leading the community engagement in those efforts so that local residents are able to participate in how this community actually looks physically. And they're able to decide how they want to use some of these shared parcels of land. For example, a community garden, they will have full say and control over how that is used. So that is a project that we're working on in California that we are.
And you should be, because it sounds really interesting and also promising in the sense that it is possible. There are obviously challenges, but those challenges can be overcome. Which brings me to my next question. What are the biggest challenges regarding youth housing?
I would say within housing in general, and again, I'm speaking from a US development lens, but with housing in general, because there are different requirements at city, county, statewide, it's not one blanket slate of rules. Things vary wildly between counties and states. And when you add in the layers that go into housing, whether it's land zoning and then different policies, and having to make sure that what you are building is aligned with local government's platform and that they are getting the support from their constituents, and then community engagement and making sure that you have the right funding, making sure that the developer being intentional about sustainability practices. And then you're getting it, and that's even before the shovel is actually in the ground and you're building the structure. So then once it's more on the market, construction labor and material costs, they fluctuate and they change. So when we take all of these into consideration, has a lot of aspects and factors that affect housing, and sometimes the different stakeholders in this equation have different incentives or different things that they want to see. So it can lead to a standstill of a project or of policy, which we see happen very often in the US when it comes to legislation. Most commonly, we know of the groups NIMBY and YIMBY, the not in my backyard and the yes in my, people that don't want specific affordable housing solutions, and other people that are adamant about having those in their neighborhoods. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and this is for established professionals that have sometimes decades in the industry. And sometimes we're still at a standstill with these experts. So add on top of all of that, young people who are not professional or licensed have the experience and the knowledge of all of this, but want to make a positive difference. It's very easy for the system to bog them down because they're seen as potentially not being able to add value to an already complex system. That's what.
I assume Youth Housing Coalition is a solution for that, but do you see other solutions as well?
Yes. So I would love to see housing authorities and various levels of government agencies include young people in these processes, whether it's having a youth action board or something where the different levels of government are really being intentional about creating a pipeline of community engagement and young people into this process. And then also, when we are looking at the very well established real estate development firms, architecture firms, there's no mandate that they have to train the generation of developers, but I think it would be great to see more partnerships between universities or programs that train developers and these really large development that we're tapping into local talents. Because one of the things that we want to combat is when we're being in cities and equitable communities is we don't always want to see the large Wall Street hedge fund exporting their developers into small town rural America. We want to tap into local talent as well and be able to allow local communities to economically and develop from these physical.
And I assume that localizing development is an opportunity in your understanding regarding smart cities. What are the biggest opportunities you can think of?
Yes, I would say small scale redevelopment buildings. So I love land banks, and leveraging buildings is something that I think is a great tool. Also, community land trusts in the U.S., in Latin America, or at least in Mexico, they call them ejidos, but land use that is zoned for cooperative ownership, I think incentivizes management. And then other forms of cooperative ownership of whether it's the actual structures that are, do think that localized talent really incentivizes people to pour into their communities because they're the ones that live there and they want to make sure they're getting what they need out of the real estate, whether it's making sure that it's walkable, whether it's making sure that there's enough parks for their children, whether it's making sure that there's grocery stores that carry the foods that they need. All of these things, the people that live in these communities are going to be the ones that care the most about it because they are the ones that are going to have to live.
In your experience, do the next generation want to get involved? So I'm asking this whether we want to involve the next generation and we want to be involved as the next generation, but we might not be the average. So in your experience, are young people want do young people want to be involved in creating the future of their cities, creating smart cities?
Yes. And it's interesting because I spend a lot of time traveling and speaking to college students about these topics specifically. And each time I go to a university, I always ask the same thing. And I ask students to raise their hand if they believe in the American dream or if they don't believe in the American dream. And I'm seeing years go on that what started off as it being weighed more towards people still believing in the American dream, it transitioned to now 50-50. And now, whenever I ask that question, oftentimes, the majority of the time, more than half, and sometimes two-thirds of the students will say that they do not believe the American dream either exists anymore or is actually achievable. And when you dig in what that means, I think that home ability to has been such a pillar of what's conceived American dream that a lot of young people, the next generation that are going through some of the things that you're going through of not being able to buy a home or working a full-time job or two full-time jobs and barely still being able to afford rent, they are being that success is possible. But when I talk to these students, they also want to change that. They want to be part of the solution. And it doesn't mean that everyone wants to be a developer or everyone wants to be an architect or everyone wants to be an urban planner. But the really interesting thing about youth housing and housing in general is that everyone needs a place to live. It's not a luxury or something that some people opt into and some people opt out of. Every single person needs somewhere to sleep at night. So it is a cause that impacts absolutely everyone, no matter your age, no matter your race, no matter your interest or what you're wanting to do professionally. Every single person has to pay to live somewhere. Really increases the level of engagement because it impacts absolutely everyone. Even if a young person doesn't want to be involved in this in a professional sense as a career, they are oftentimes still interested from an advocacy or policy standpoint because they want to simply afford to be able to live somewhere. And that in itself is oftentimes enough to get someone engaged in.
And then, if someone wants to engage more with this topic, what would you recommend for them?
I am an advocate of community councils and community and neighborhood planning units. I think getting involved at the most grassroots local government level is the best way to be able to get an understanding of what is really happening in your neighborhood. What are other residents thinking? What's the average price of rent? What are the upcoming developments? What is being proposed? Who was supporting? Are maybe your neighbors not supporting developments? I think getting involved in any sort of neighborhood planning commission, local housing authority, even something local. Many large cities in the US have something that's more local than a city council. They'll break it down into different neighborhoods. So I think that is a great way to just attend meetings. You don't, and these meetings are not for housing or real estate experts or professionals. These are for people that live in the community to talk about their community. So I think that's a great way to understand who are the community leaders, the advocates, the activists, what's actually going on in my neighborhood to get an understanding of where you can best be plugged in. I think that's a great first way to just get an understanding of what's going on.
And then had to use Housing Coalition's educational site, just saying that you have
Yes,
also those.
yes,
Jen,
absolutely. And then go to our website.
Jen, you have been very generous with your time and answers. Thank you so much for doing this work because this is freaking important. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
My only closing for the audience would be as we're seeing our communities change and the cities around us change, whether they're hopefully becoming more walkable and accessible, or sometimes we're seeing them go in the opposite direction. I encourage you to meet your neighbors. Whenever I talk about community organizing and grassroots advocacy, it can be such a gargantuan task when you think about activists and grassroots organizing and changing the world from the bottom up. But when you get to the foundation of community engagement, the best way to start is can you name three of your neighbors? If you don't know three of your neighbors, that's where you can start. That's how you can start engaging with your community, creating those roots, that support. So to connected with your local community, to be involved in what's going on, no matter who you are or where you come from. Most of all, know that your voice and your lived experience matters. You don't need to be a professional housing anything. You, as a living being and resident of this planet, have a voice is worth listening to.
Thank you so much, Jen. If you want to learn more about Jen, links will be provided in the show notes, and the Smart Cities Council website can inform you even more. What have you learned from this interview? What questions do you have after listening to Jen? What would you like to know more about? Let us know on the Smart Cities Council website or on LinkedIn. Look out for other episodes with the global thought leaders or topical discussions. And thanks for tuning in.